That's a great response. What do you know about lead service line inventories?
I just know that there's legislation that we need to have it all accounted for.
Yeah.
And I'm not entirely sure. I haven't been involved with what action comes after that, but our hand in that has just been trying to identify what could potentially be out there for that action. For the city of Glenwood, our kind of thought process is, you know, the lead was no longer used in any sort of line after like 78.
Yes.
So we know we're clear for everything. For all of our main lines, we're good.
Yes.
Connections to service lines are the issue.
Correct.
And there's a lot of gray area for us because we have a lot of new construction and rebuilt homes, but we don't have any record of whether the entire service line was replaced or what. So we're kind of trying to narrow down our search a little bit using construction records, but it's been kind of
the challenge is redevelopment in particular.
Yes.
Yeah, because once you put in a service line, it's probably they're going to keep the service line unless they need to replace it.
Right. So anything built after 1978, new lots, new subdivisions, all that, all good.
Yeah, if it was from bare ground.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Not replacing an existing structure.
Right. Right. But how much of your town is redeveloped?
A good chunk.
Like, would you give a percentage?
I think, you know, we're really geographically limited in Glenwood because we're right in the canyon. So,
yeah.
You know, there have been a ton of remodels, ton of tear downs. I think maybe 10%, maybe.
10%?
That's totally off the cuff.
Oh, totally. It may be. My guess would be higher, but yeah, it really is an issue for redevelopment in particular. If you've had a lot of redevelopment in your town post World War I, World War II, especially, lead was used primarily as service lines after the war because there was a surplus of lead after the wars. Imagine why there was a surplus of lead after the war, so it's cheaper. And at that point in time, did we have any concept that lead was going to be dangerous? We should have had some concepts, perhaps. But it was late 1960s where, you know, lead-based paint became a recognized issue, and that its effect on children was really, you know, fully recognized, and the effect on society and marginalized people particularly came about, and that was mostly through advocacy and scientific research, environmental protection. So we had to kind of go backwards and think, okay, what did we do? How did we do it? Kind of like PFAS now, right? Where did this come from? How long have we had it? Why didn't we know it was a problem in the beginning? And those are probably the two biggest issues right now in water service provision when it comes to environmental contamination is post-Flint, Michigan, where they changed the water supply, and then that different type of water was able to dissolve some of the contaminants that were in the system differently, and mostly these service lines being the cause of it. Service lines could be completely lead, but yeah, has anyone else, you know, participated in a lead service line inventory work other than you two? I hadn't thought about that, but you know, knowing what the material looks like, comparing it against, I mean, I have to hit that magic button, right? Come on, magic button.
Is this work you're doing at Plummer Engineering, or?
Yes.
Okay.
So we've cut our teeth on I'll show you some data from it. Is the right one? Did I get into the right one? Make sure. I think I did. Nope, this is the wrong one. Well, I'll keep talking while I get to the right version here. If I can. That's the last thing that comes up. That's okay. There we go. Much better. Okay. Now I found it. Thanks for bearing with me. Well, except it says closing, so I better go page up. Here are all my slides. Too many. Requires by October 16th of 2024 every service provider to submit to the state an inventory of all service lines and what their materials are. And they are required to review all records, and we're going to talk about that, and notify their customers within 30 days if they have a lead galvanized requiring replacement or unknown material type. So that they can be notified. Also, it has to be made public 30 days after submission. So this is the kind of fun part. There is no penalty right now. In fact, the lead and copper rule improvement that EPA published as a draft 2-3 years ago has not been finalized, but it's going to be finalized before the deadline, and we're expecting not to change very much. Right now, it doesn't hold a penalty. And in fact, that's kind of what's affecting production the most, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah, many public water systems will not comply by 16th October of 2024. So carrot and a stick. There's certainly carrots. There is funding that you can receive through the states to not only fund your replacement of lead service lines, but also fund the inventory. It's a little bit challenging to jump through, and that was the case in Colorado. We had a potential client that really wanted us to do this work, but we're not a disadvantaged business enterprise, and all funding from the federal government through the EPA to the states had to go first to compete to disadvantaged business enterprises, and that's understandable. But it's also makes it very difficult to have all that funding executed during a very short period of time, because there's only so many available that could perform that work. And even subbing, you'd have to offer it to a disadvantaged business enterprise. So we passed on that opportunity, instead took another opportunity out of Texas, and I'll show you some of the work we did there. What else does it say here? Funding. Yeah, I think I already summarized these things. Reading upside down. This is why I have my notes, right? Do this. Okay, here's Florida. This is the only way I could status the current submission rate, is that Florida happens to have a, how many have submitted out of the total number of public water systems in the state. So they have 2,300 public water systems in the state, and 51 have submitted so far. That's not a very high number, and of course everybody could be waiting till the deadline, and then when they have to do it, right.
There's going to be one.
Right, but what my message is to you today is that this is not the end. This is the beginning of lead service line inventories, because even though there's not a direct penalty associated with not submitting to your state, there is an indirect public relations issue if you're not. You will receive a certificate of non-compliance from the state that will be made public, and your residents and the press particularly may run with that with great advocacy. Why are you not taking responsibility for protecting our children and our people? And that really is kind of the first step in demonstrating not only that you have knowledge of what could be contaminating water from lead fittings and service lines, but also it is the way in which you're likely going to get funding to replace those lines, is by looking at that inventory at the state and federal levels. So even though it seems like we have a carrot and no sticks, and this deadline is going to come to pass, right now the biggest stick is going to be public relations issues. And so keep that in mind, and that might change the demand side for work to doing service line inventories. Service line inventories sound pretty boring. Do they?
Mostly just sticky.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of factors.
I believe there are significant business reasons why everyone should be doing it. I think it's going to be a high demand after the deadline, after the notices are out, and probably after the rule is finalized. Maybe they will have a penalty. Maybe they will increase the requirements by 2027. to include all details when it comes to fittings and lead solder, which is now kind of an optional thing that you want to record because they expect that it will change. But there's enough of a moral imperative to do this, and I think that's what's really important as well, is expressing a value of protecting people from contamination from lead, especially children and those marginalized, but everybody. And why would we not do that? Why wouldn't we spend that time to assure our public that their drinking water is safe, right? So, so I'm sure you're gonna have questions, and I'm gonna go through these slides rather quickly. And I want to have questions and answers, but presenting is gonna have a little bit of give and take. I probably have a slide that'll answer questions in more detail, stuff like that. These are the big takeaways. Okay, so our case example here is less than 5,000 people in Texas. So it should be pretty simple and straightforward, right? We said we would make sure that it complied with the state submission or guidance, that we would take all the information that they gave us and compile it into a GIS inventory that could be exported for that Excel spreadsheet submission. At every state, it's an Excel spreadsheet submission. I'm sorry. So we created an export routine to make it more or less get in there, and we can talk about that too. The client would be responsible for providing the records and notify us if there's anything wrong and review the result, right? Doesn't that make sense for a contract? You think that would be enough? It wasn't enough. And I'm going to get to why that wasn't enough to make clarified in the statement of work. I don't know if you could see this, and I'm going to come in close, so it's at least in the dark. In fact, I don't even mind if it's down here. Maybe you can see a little bit better. But here's our community, less than 5,000 people. Let's see, page down. We zoom in a little bit. You can see, where the developments are and address points and parcels. Zooming into the downtown area, which is the oldest part, which is going to have the most likely lead. And so you're seeing at least the unknowns being in blue. The reds are actually, we don't know if they are real. We would get lots of addresses in the billing data set that were either redeveloped and no longer exist, or bulk water for a development, or maybe there's an apparatus there that is providing water for landscaping. We just didn't have enough detail, and so there were like 53 out of the 1,500 addresses that we couldn't verify as being structures that were workplaces or domiciles, right? But for the most part, it's the year built that you want to know, and in this case, that's coming from an assessor's auxiliary table that is tied to the improvements that are on the parcels. And so, it took a little bit of joining, both logical and spatial, to get that information of year built over to the address points. We did that, and then we also kind of generalized the earliest date for each subdivision, so that can kind of guide us on what's most likely for each subdivision, earliest date built. And then we can kind of work from there. Here's our counts by materials and counts by status. You can see most of it being unknown, right? Everything else was pretty much after the year build date of any lead service infrastructure in play. And you were quoting 70s, and that's true, but there's somewhat of a due diligence to make certain of that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Here's the spread in this community of when properties were developed. We just happen to be lucky that most of our properties were built, post 1957. Had it been post World War II, we would have a lot more lead service lines likely, but we still have to investigate the records for every unknown and find out if we can make an unknown known, right? And that's where the hard work comes. Getting beyond that state. Here's the Excel spreadsheet. This is kind of what it looks like. Of course, we had things filled in like city, state, zip, and latitude, longitude, but then also other data fields, and you can kind of see what that detailed inventory looks like when you're submitting it, and all the metadata that they want in other spread worksheets for the submission. When we left the work, we were kind of frustrated, and I'll tell you why in a moment, but these are the things that we were most concerned about. That we had 53 unconfirmed, not real, possibly unreal locations, that we weren't able to examine all the records. And that's not because we didn't try, it's because we recognize now, and this is probably important from your experiences, most of the records that we need to investigate are from when?
Pre-digital.
Yes, they're almost all paper records, and are they scanned?
No.
Are they indexed?
No.
Do we even know where they are?
They're in a dusty cabinet in the basement somewhere.
Right, right. So at the beginning of the onset of this project for us, we were told that they didn't have any records. We were told they were all water damaged, and there was nothing left except what was in the back of one of our engineer's car. So we went forward with the statement of work with that assumption. When we got into the opening of the project, we were like, no, we have a shed. Yeah, there's a little bit of water damage in the back of the shed, but we can let you go through it. And I'm like, okay. So I just happened to have the opportunity to, our Plummer is headquartered out of Fort Worth, and they had a kind of a consulting 101 class that you go to for every A&E firm. There's some activity in trying to understand what the company culture is like. And my counterpart, was the project manager on this, she was down there for another project for the same client on their wastewater treatment plant. So I hitched a ride with her on her way up there, intending to spend 5 hours looking at this shed, right? We had traffic accidents on the tollway, so that took away 2 of our hours. We get there, and I go to the Public Works complex, and I find the shed, take lots of pictures of the shed, open up the shed, lots of boxes, all throughout. All the map boxes are just kind of stacked, and there's about 20 of them. They could be engineering record drawings, they could be distribution maps, they could be anything, right? And then they nicely labeled most of the file boxes, and that was helpful, not all of them. So I take a picture of every box, I take a picture of every map box, and then we start rolling out all the rolls to see what we could find in 3 hours, right? Which, open, close, dig through, take a picture of the top, As you can imagine, we weren't able to get through all of it, and I showed them the ones we wanted to find out more about, and the boxes, I directed them to where they could find more. How many people have worked for small towns? What happens with small towns, or any small jurisdiction? How many people are there on staff?
Not enough.
And do they have one responsibility, or do they have 25 responsibilities? In this case, they didn't have a city manager. The city manager had left, so they had people taking turns as interim city manager, and they were all inundated. Didn't have any time to be able to look at any records, right? So we had it under contract for them to provide records. They didn't have any time or people to be able to do that. So we can't say that we had an exhaustive review of the records, because we neither planned for in our budget to make that happen at the beginning, because we had a false assumption, and they didn't have time to do it either, right? Still, we prepared the data based on what we were able to receive, what we were able to have in our own reconnaissance for the amount of time that we were there, and prepare a submission for them. But that's what all these other points are. So these are the other things that you should do before the deadline to improve, and you can amend the contract, and we could perhaps get someone on site to be able to do that work, or take it as your responsibility. But that's where we're at, right? A little frustrating. Let's take a look at some other examples of, well, I don't know if you can see these, I gotta get closer, right? It's sunshine, yeah. And you might even recognize some of them. These next 5 are from Colorado, and you'll see some differentiation. Symbology is a little bit hard to read. Each one has their own legend. This one I happened to not grab the legend for, but you're seeing some of the lead or possibly lead on the left. So it does run by community on the, when was it developed first, and who said they had a house that was from 1942? What's the likelihood of you having lead? Do you know?
It's been checked. It's cover surface line. They came out.
Awesome.
Denver Water came out and potholed and checked and verified it.
Denver Water is, I have learned, is one of the most proactive on lead service line inventory work in the country. I knew that they were doing a good job. Now I know that they're doing a great job.
They kind of inadvertently kicked this whole initiative off, I think, because EPA had changed their lead levels in the water systems, and they were pushing us to add. I'm a surveyor for Denver Water, and they pushed Denver Water, or they were pushing Denver Water to add more orthotriphosphate into our water systems. But we said, hey, well, why don't we look at where the sources of these lead, where the sources of lead are coming from. And they were like, okay, well, we made an argument that say, hey, this is most likely it's coming from all these lead service lines. So then we got a forbearance on the lead level reduction, or the amount of water to add more chemical to our water, and said, hey, we'll start removing these lead service lines proactively. And so that's kind of kicked off this program, and I think that started turning the wheels in Washington too. And everybody's like, okay, well, let's start getting this. Like, we need to figure out how many lead service lines are in, the whole country. We are
And Denver is a good example because, how much of its interior infrastructure is redeveloped.
Yep.
It's a good chunk, right?
Yeah, so they put that urban growth boundary now, so everything is getting built inside that boundary. And Denver Water's distribution boundary has been now set. We can't go there. Said, hey, this is our limits, because we need to focus in on that. It pretty much follows current urban growth boundary as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, good example. Here is another example. And if you can see, you probably can't see in the gray, but it's a little spotty right now. It's a partial inventory. They've kind of gone little by little and trying to develop, I don't know if they're doing it by observation entirely. They should be doing it by records first. So you're going to see some variation. This one's really hard to read. Almost all the symbology is gray. I wouldn't encourage that. But they're showing unknown galvanized requiring replacement or inactive, and they apparently don't have anything that is lead. I don't know if that's true because maybe some of their unknowns will become. I'm just showing some examples. Here's another one. You can see, one red lead there, but the dark black and yellow are the unknowns. So one of the main problems is going to be how many unknowns do you have out of the total, and how can you reduce the number of unknowns over time? Because that will increase your level of likelihood for funding and also decrease the amount of expenditure for replacement. And that's also going to have just the replacement alone is going to have what's the right word? An effect upon your community. You're going to have closed roads or construction going on that will make it inconvenient for people who are living when they're having the replacement occur. So you want to reduce that level of impact as much as possible. In this case, they've done it by parcel, but you can't see the status. You have to click on every one to find out the status. Probably not a good design. Here's another.
You actually have to click on it. You can't just roll over.
Yeah, so you can see that there's a variety of ways expressing lead service line inventories. You could use points, you could use lines. We would prefer to use lines if we knew where the lines were, but how many people know where their service lines are underground? Do we have enough records showing the positional accuracy of the beginning and ending points coming off the main to the pit, from the meter pit to the building itself? Do we know where those things are?
Only on the new stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and almost never in utilities do we keep track of
Don't shoot at Denver Water.
service.
We don't shoot in
Yes.
our service lines. We go. They strike a line through the meter valve and the meter. And
Would it be easier if we knew where they all were?
oh yeah,
And if it was all on record and we inventoried it that way, would it cost less?
yeah. We're trying. We have our 811 responders now. I'm trying to get GPS equipment into their hands so when they trace the service line, they map it.
So we could actually represent these over time as linear assets like they should be, right?
Yep.
but we just haven't done it in the past because we didn't think it was important, and we thought we could always go back there and find it. But how easy is it for us to find things underground?
Tough. Extreme.
And how costly, and how often do we have to do it? You know,
All the time. Yeah.
you know, this is your job, right?
I do support for a
Met-
response on the survey side.
Metro Tech now, which is a locator, now can integrate with Tremble, and you can actually locate and put points
You can do
every every X number of feet, so you can actually draw a line directly in using a locator with high accuracy GPS now.
Yeah, if you're burying the line, you could put in RF. Or if you're burying the line, you could put in a conducting line, so you can find it underground. But
Yeah,
finding
not
it
all
after the
of
fact.
us. Yeah, there's a lot of PVC pipe out there. You can't, and there's no tracer wire.
Ground penetrating radar might be helpful.
In our,
Not
our
in
soil
Denver.
environment, no, it's not great.
It's not helpful for most people.
Yeah.
And maybe when we have muography, we can find cavities underground. But that's another 15, 20 years of technology to help us with that, right? That'll totally change our lives.
For new stuff.
Right.
Everything, yeah.
But if we would just kept track of it when we put it in the ground,
Yep.
it would have cost so much less.
Yep.
And all of our inventories and all of our efforts subsequent to locate, the cost reduction would be
Huge.
fantastically
Yeah.
down.
We only started that mapping our mains like 10 years ago, shooting every joint in as it was put in the ground.
I was gonna say, we barely know where some of our mains are, let alone service lines. Correct.
And part of that is just keeping the record and being able to go back to the record. And so if there's 3 things of value that I want to do in my career field next 15 years, it's number 1, serve the underserved. I've been able to do that quite well, both in my own business and currently with Plummer, because we focus on small clients. Number 2, focus on data quality, so measuring independently the data quality of any data so that it can be expressed, and then the GIS manager or anybody else can kind of do with you as it will. But if it's independently measured, then that's a high value, low cost proposal. And then thirdly, it's managing, maintaining, and organizing engineering records so they can reduce the cost of field excavations, reduce the cost of locations.
Strengths to having better information for underground responsibilities.
But most are going to be like this small city in Texas, where they have a shed in the back of the public works directory. They labeled some of the boxes, but everything's just pushed in there and not particularly organized. And you got to go through it all, and that takes a lot of time. Let alone is it accessible at that point, right? So, so let me run through some of these dates. Well, there's main dates. 1980, when they put in the interim drinking water rule, they had requirements to do sampling for lead and copper, and so there were forms that were submitted from each water supplier to the state for compliance, at least for testing. And so that's the first set of records that are directly related to lead service lines. In 1991, they improved that. The lead bans across the state were established by the EPA, but they came from 1986 to 1989, varying on each state's legislation. So the lead mandate is different. Also, what is different is the amended lead ban date. So in 2014, sometime between January and March, each state adopted the EPA's regulations that reduced the definition of lead-free from 8% down to 0.25%. Now, it probably didn't do much on the ground, and we didn't change what was already buried, right? But it just changed the threshold of what is lead-free. And that's why there's an increasing level of interest in fittings, solder, and connections that might have all or portions of it being lead. And having that in the inventory is not a requirement by the EPA, but it's highly recommended and suggested by all. So that's part of what we're trying to keep track of in the inventory itself. Colorado, kind of a regulatory state, so each of the states kind of constrained more or more fully defined what the EPA had asked to be done. And there's some very interesting things here. Like particularly the definition of a lead service or any service line might include something between buildings. Like if you had an apartment complex that had a line from one building to another building to provide water service, each line is a service line to each building. Does that make sense? And then what I was amazed with is what often people didn't require. They all require a location identifier, but the only ones that require a street address right now are Texas. So you could have anything as an identifier. You could have a billing ID as an identifier, and that could be a location identifier, but it might not be obvious to the public what that is. Most desirable, of course, is the street address, right? And so with the combination of the billing addresses and then matching them to the 911 address points, of course, we had to do a lot of filtering and restructuring of the address data to make it normalized and complete and recognize, names of roads that had more than one name. So there's all that address fun stuff, right? It's all text-based and highly manual. And so we're able to do that and get to the level of effort that we're in. Basically, this overview of these 6 steps, we're just looking at number 2. You can get funding. After you get the inventory put together, then you do material investigations. You go out and excavating or looking at meter pits. And you don't have to do that before the deadline, but you can. I think that's where most of the level of effort will be. We'll continue to be in the investigation of existing records, because I don't think everyone's going to be able to do all the physical of all the records before the deadline, like we couldn't. We didn't have enough time. Records review, material investigation. And in these 6 categories for records review. So we talked about, some of the regulations that came in 1980, 1991. That's that first category. The second 4 are bins of different types of records. The 5th one is if the state is saying anything more, which I haven't found a state that has said also this yet. And then anything else. So how did we do in our small Texas town? Construction records and plumbing codes. So that included approved plans, record drawings, building codes, ordinances that prescribed bans on lead. And where do you find these things? Sometimes you find them in the annotations. Sometimes you find them in the notes. So you got to look through every page and find anything that describes the material. You also want to keep track of the diameter. Anything larger than 4 inches in Colorado can be assumed to be non-lead. Anything larger than 2 inches in Texas can be assumed to be non-lead. Yes, the states are all over the place on this.
Why is that?
Just what is typical and what's considered typical over time has different interpretations. The EPA hasn't really specified.
Is that because like a 4-inch main can't be made out of lead, or is that what they're assuming? Or
you could have in industrial days a 4-inch service line.
Yeah, it's not typical though.
Yeah. It would be to a large building,
Yeah, 4-inch usually goes steel, cast iron. Now it's PVC in the ground, but it's not.
You're probably bored by now, but when you're looking at the billing records, we ask for all the billing records that was current in the past, so we can find all the addresses. We had accounts that were like 25 times the same address. We each had its own account number, right? So one failure we had is not keeping the last account number, which would have been the right thing to do to tag along with the data. So that's an improvement for us. But also making sure that we only have one and only one address listed for the same location, as we talked about before. Distribution system inspections and records. So work orders, customer service inspections, meter service repair replacement records, cross connection and backflow prevention inspections, observations during normal operations, so sketches and I think work orders in that case is kind of the most important in this category. And we didn't have a lot, but we did have water quality sampling reports, and that helped us to resolve a few of ours unknowns, as well as requirements for cross connection back and backflow inspection records. And what's left? Yeah, Texas said we don't have anything that we require. Just make sure you look at all the records, and these are the other things that I found that could be helpful that weren't listed. particularly historic imagery. It's not perfect, but it gives you a better idea of when at least the land was first disturbed. So that gives you a better time frame for some of these older facilities, if that makes any sense. By getting intervals of historic imagery for your community and being able to see what the progression is occurring for all the ones that you don't have yearbook dates, especially before 1950, it's kind of tricky, but not impossible. Improvements. Yeah, writing a proposal. So we want to do one thing very different for our next work, and it's to instead of assuming what we're hearing is true, to assume what we're hearing is not true, and going and sampling the record set on site, estimating the cost it would take to look at and review all the records, including not only the condition of those records, but the indexing of those records, and whether any of them are accessible. So I think that is the main difference. Also changing it from being just a back office work to having some liaison on site that is not the staff of the city in this case, but instead, contracted on site, going through all the drawers, approved to do that, high level trust, and an investigator basically. That is probably what we want to do going forward, is really plan for an on-site investigator to find all the records and then ship and scan all that information back to the back office to perform the work. Does that make sense? And I think that is the main lesson that we learned. We lost our quality assurance program on this one. I mean, we did a lot of self-review, but we had an independent team ready to do quality assurance, and we ran out of money. Because it wasn't scoped for us to do all this record review, because we didn't think we had many records, because that's what they told us at the beginning. Right. So our plan is, go in with enough in the initial statement of work to review the records, and then amend it with an estimate on the cost for reviewing records once those records are seen.
If you went in with the assumption that there were no records, how would you do this analysis though?
Well, most of the data that we took from the beginning was from public information, from the county, the assessor's office, the appraisal district in this case, from the E911, from the billing records. They could give us the billing records. So that gave us kind of a baseline. But we just can't reduce the number of unknowns until we do this exhaustive records review. Does that make sense? They are under the responsibility to do the records review before submission deadline. We're not under contract to do that, but we didn't stipulate we're not under the contract to review all of your records. We didn't state in the statement of work whose responsibility it is to review all the records. And by the time we had spent, I was so nervous and upset, I was afraid they were going to demand us to review all the records because it wasn't clear in the statement of work whose responsibility it was. When I finally told them, they're like, "Oh, we don't care." But it was a very emotional experience for me because I thought I had put a great risk of liability of the company to do all this work for free, and I don't want to do that again, right? Did I answer your question? What was your question?
How would you do the analysis without the data?
So you get a baseline, and that was what we were planning on, is just getting a baseline anyway, because we didn't have any records. This is what we would do anyway, right? But then it's a tedious process of reducing those unknowns record by record by record by record by record.
I mean, but for each unknown, there's a dollar amount on how much it will cost to go research that and figure that out, right? Does the EPA have a threshold where if you've done 97% of all homes that could have lead, they don't care about
right
the last
now, both the
three?
EPA and the states are expecting you to certify by October that you reviewed all of your records. I don't think that's realistic for anybody, except for maybe Denver Water.
We got a head start.
So, what's the next step then? Is the next step the unknown just pop up each property?
So the next step is really continuing to do both records review and material investigation. So you submit it, and you're honest about what you submitted. I couldn't review all the records. It's too exhaustive. I'm not organized enough. I don't have the people to do it. Maybe I can do it over the next 3 years. So continue to review all those records, because that is what is assumed to be the baseline. But the cost of reviewing records versus the cost of internal investigation could be, depending on the situation. It's a lot easier to just look at the meter pit and say, okay, test. I got a penny or a nickel, and it's great. This is lead.
That's a question I had. So
Most of our service lines since 1970 on probably are PVC. oddly enough, and we can take a look. I got like lots of pictures on the data model. I took the ESRI's data model and all the spreadsheets from all the 4 states we provide services in, which is Oklahoma, Texas, Colorado, and Florida, and smushed them together to make one service line inventory database model.
Why only those 4 states?
Because we don't provide services in other states right now.
Okay.
Well,
Is that by choice or you just don't have customers in those?
we don't have customers. We have customers in New Mexico, but we don't have offices in New Mexico. We only have offices in those 4 states. Our personnel are spread across the country, so we're planning on changing as opportunities may lie. But that's what we have right now. And I took ESRI's as well and smushed them together. And guess what? None of the materials include PVC. They only include plastic. We're like, this is ridiculous. Why wouldn't you include the most common service line in any of these inventories? And my work associate is like, other people are there's some serious concern with materials in PVC that could be contaminated human health.
I was thinking 20 years from now, we'll be doing the same thing.
Exactly. We want to keep record not only of the lead, we want to keep record of everything, right? We don't want to do this again. We want to know where it is. We want to know what it is.
Not just lead or not lead.
Yeah. Let's do this and keep the costs low by taking advantage of every opportunity we have. And so this is not going to be going away. I would love to see a future where all service lines for all utilities are identified underground where they lie and all their infrastructure associated with it, whether it's owned or not owned by the system, doesn't matter, so that we can reduce the cost of fuel expeditions that we are spending a tremendous amount of money on right now. Personnel is the biggest cost, is it not? So if we just keep better records and keep better organized records, that's going to reduce not only this, but all engineering, design, operations, and maintenance for everybody. So that's my last moral proposition that I want to do in the last 15 years of my career is help people recognize how they will reduce costs and increase value by just keeping a library. Make library science great again, right? Any questions? I'm well over my time budget, I'm sure. Yeah, local liaison, data supplied in caches from the ground, enterprise file synchronization services already. Having somebody on site, and then equipment for the person in the field to do all the scanning as necessary. We had this huge giant map, I called it, and it was the size of 4D taped together, except it wasn't taped together, it was one big paper. And I tried to take a picture with my phone, and I have nothing. There's nothing on it. So you have to have something high resolution enough, and maybe the casual equipment, maybe it could have done it if I had typed in the settings. But a scanner might be useful in some of these cases. A mobile one, you can take over, and someone there that lives there that can talk to people.
Well, like an industrial scanner that you put in like a box truck and...
Yeah, I looked at the spec, this Context IQ 2490 rental. Sounds great to me, right? That's one of the biggest problems is in inventorying and managing record sets is having some sort of an organized way to scan it. If anybody's been an archivist or in an archivist organization I have, that's a lot of time, a lot of money.
I'll tell you what our issue is. We're trying to do the same thing right now. It's a bit of a catch-22 because none of the local staff have the time to devote to this, like you said.
Yes. So you want it under contract. This is something you want under contract.
But the problem is when we bring somebody in,
they don't know
from the
anything about your
outside,
operations.
They don't know what they're looking at. So they have the time to catalog everything and file everything away, but without the inside knowledge about
they don't know what the
those
value of it
projects
is.
are. It's like, yeah, we can have somebody come in and give this a file name, but
has anybody worked in a place where they have a high level of organization for their physical or scan files? And that's for your surveying work.
Yeah, we have a couple.
Assessors often have to do this.
We have two
Yeah, the
cataloging
assessors have
groups.
done that.
We have our ARG group, which has engineering records, and then it's associated with a web map, and then we actually have like another records group that does everything from
Yes, you do.
receipts to work orders to
Everything.
anything.
Everything is a
Everything.
record.
Yeah.
Yes.
And putting that into a digital archive, and they're pretty close to getting everything. There's still like some old Mylars
Yes. So I was lucky because I worked for the Air Force for 10 years, and that's wonderful, right? Because they have regulations that they have to meet and inspections they have to meet. So they have to manage and maintain their vault, even though some of them do a very poor job. Some end up burning records or throwing them in the garbage against regulation. But they have a responsibility that helps a lot to do it well, and to do it well, and it makes everything cost effective. All of our engineering and design is correct. All of our operations and maintenance is maintained and efficient. So yeah, if I could convert anybody out there, it would be reduce your cost of operation by spending, a low amount of dollars in comparison of your construction projects, and just get your crap together, right? Did I bulldozer anyone's thoughts or questions in the comments? Flat file record initial effort, but some of these should be relational. You might want more than one record tied to an investigation, or more than one record acknowledged as helping you understand what the material is. And so we normalized it to second level.
Thank you so much.